What do you think, team? Shall we just kick off? Yeah, thumbs up from
Let's do
Minik.
it.
All right. Well, let's just say welcome in everyone. I think there's, as I said, people are still coming in, and we'll just let everyone come in and get settled as we start off here. If we haven't had a chance to meet before, I'll just say quickly that I'm Craig Riggs. I'm one of the co-founders at ReaderBound, and I lead client services for ReaderBound, which is both a team and a platform that's concerned with building customized websites for book publishers. We have a really interesting mix on the webinar today of folks that are both running ReaderBound sites and folks that aren't. Part of what happens at ReaderBound is that we all learn from each other. And by that, I mean, we learn all the time from publishers that are using the platform. It really informs a lot of our thinking around how new features and services develop around ReaderBound. And this is, in so many respects, we're exploring new areas of practice in publishing. And we can't help but learn from each other in the process of doing so. So we wanted in this webinar series that we're kicking off today to kind of open up that process a little bit more and just create a space where we could exchange some ideas and learn a thing or two from each other in the process. So the webinar series that we're inaugurating today is part of what we expect will be an occasional webinar program that will happen throughout the year. And we'll be tackling other focused subjects in the weeks and months ahead. So if you're on our list for this webinar, you'll certainly get an update when our next one is scheduled, and we invite you to come back, of course, for all of the webinars in this series. I think it's going to be a really interesting space for us all. But today, our focus is very much on Google Analytics. So speaking of interesting areas of practice, and we're joined today for our first webinar by our first distinguished guest speaker, who is Minik Sherratt, who's with us today. Minik is an absolute authority in digital marketing and one of the best experts we know when it comes to Google Analytics. She has made herself a real authority in this space and has given us a lot of great advice and direction over the years. So Minik, if you haven't met her before, I'll just say quickly that she began her career in publishing at Raincoast, if we go back in time a little ways, where she spearheaded the first Harry Potter online campaigns, as well as the launch of Raincoast podcast series and blog in the mid-aughts, I guess it was, right? Sort of 04, 05-ish. She founded Boxcar Marketing in 2007, and she teaches extensively on Google Analytics, campaign tracking, online measurement, and even a few more aspects of digital marketing if you ask her nicely. So Minik is going to lead our session today. And also with us is Trish Osuch, who's been instrumental in putting this webinar series together. A big thank you, Trish, for all of your work on this. It's a new thing for us to do at ReaderBound, and we certainly wouldn't have got it done without Trish's help. So Trish is going to be staying with us for the session today, and we'll be moderating questions and sort of chat commentary throughout the session. So we encourage you to make good use of the chat function during today's session. I wanted to say that we are starting with analytics because it's a subject, it's something that we've thought a lot about in terms of the role of analytics in the ReaderBound platform. And in fact, Minik has done a tremendous amount of work in building our basic analytics setup that we use on ReaderBound sites. But it's an area where, we always feel like we can go further. And we always wonder, how much people are really making use of some of the ready tools that are available there to help you see where readers are coming from, what they're doing on the site, and for folks that are selling directly through their sites, how that buyer behavior is unfolding across the user experience on your website. And so Minik's going to help us explore that today. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to learn more about analytics and to think a little bit more about how the role that it plays in our day-to-day work, right? So a couple of quick housekeeping things. We're recording this session, as you may have noticed. And so no need to take frantic notes. We'll send recording links to the recording out to everybody after the session. We've also had a good few people that have expressed interest in coming today, but they're away in Frankfurt or doing something else. And so we'll be sharing the recording a little more widely after our session today. And then, as I said earlier, we invite you just to put, Monique has invited us all to put questions and comments into the chat throughout the session today. So please feel free to fire away at any time. Trish will help us make sense out of it all and kind of surface some of those important questions as we go through the session. So that's it for me. I think Trish and I will step into the background, make a little more space for Monique's sunlit backdrop, sun-dappled backdrop here. And thanks again for joining us today. Over to you, Monique.
Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the warm welcome. I think one of the questions that Craig posed initially was about what we're doing in kind of a day-to-day practice or weekly practice or monthly practice when it comes to analytics. So before I share my screen, I'd like to ask Trish to please launch our first poll. I'd like to have a quick look at how people are using analytics today. In particular, do you never use it? Do you rarely use it? Sometimes, often? Maybe you can just give me a quick finger on the pulse of what you're doing with analytics. So the poll question, I think, popped up and then disappeared for me. So I'm not sure if that's the case. Maybe Trish can just come back and stick handle that with me.
Sorry, Monique. Craig's actually managing the poll.
Oh, sorry.
Just give him one sec to troubleshoot why. I saw it pop up and disappear as well. It was like the fastest poll ever. You only got a millisecond to answer.
Yeah, it's I can see it, but it seems like not anybody else can. So judging from the lack of crowd response. Why don't we invite people to answer the question in the chat for now, just so that we don't hold up the proceedings, but just everyone just chime in the chat and just let us know, like, do you never, rarely, sometimes, often, how often do you find yourself looking at analytics?
Craig, you'll need to enable the chat as well for everyone, please. Thank you.
This is the wonderful thing about the inaugural webinar.
Yeah. Did I mention it was our first? Did I mention it was our first webinar? Yeah. Oh, hang on. Relaunch poll. How about that one?
Nice.
Progress. So I think pretty much everybody's, responded. Shall I share the results?
Yes, please.
Okay. There we go.
All right. I think that's a good little bump there. Some of the rarely, sometimes, often. I mean, those percentages make a lot of sense to me. I daily I'm looking at analytics. But it's good to know internally what people are doing. And I know whoever actually looks at the analytics is sometimes not the people who are on this call. So it's a good kind of check-in, little take the pulse of the crowd. So I'm going to share my screen and we will get started here. I'm hoping you're all seeing my slide screen at the moment. Is that true?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. All right, so we're looking today at Google Analytics and how you can use this tool to improve some of your marketing decisions. And we're going to look at the Google Merchandise Store in our examples. It's obviously t-shirts and merchandise, and it's kind of the closest demo tool that I have to a publisher site because there are collections and categories. We have product pages with item descriptions. There's a search function, there's e-commerce. So a lot of things that are similar to a typical publisher site. For those of you who are brand new to analytics, Google Analytics is a piece of tracking code that you add to every page of your website. And then behind the scenes, it's tracking where people click, where they go on the site, how they arrive to the site, what pages they look at, what page they leave from. And of course, you might have heard that Google Analytics is transitioning away from Universal Analytics. Universal Analytics is the name of the version of Google Analytics that most people are using. And they've recently launched GA4 or Google Analytics 4. And it's a big deal because it's a complete overhaul to how Google has been tracking and processing data in the past. So we're going to use this Google Merchandise Store because thankfully they are running both Universal Analytics and GA4. So that means we can log into their demo account and have a look at both versions of the tool. And that's actually the recommended approach right now. So Google is phasing out this version of the tool that we've been using, and that's going to happen July 1st, 2023. So in the past, there have been updates to analytics, but as analytics users, we have used the same tracking ID, the same piece of code on the site, and we've logged into the exact same place. There's just been new features. As I said, this time is completely different. They are going to stop tracking data in the existing system on July 1st. So your data is going to drop to 0 and nothing new will be added. And then 6 months later, you won't be able to log in to see that historic data either. I'm in a panic about this. Most people are sort of slowly making their way to like, oh, maybe we'll get GA4 set up. So what Google wants people to do is basically use the setup assistant and to run Universal Analytics and GA4 in parallel. So they've created this little assistant that you can access in the admin section of Google Analytics. So if you have admin privileges, you'll log in and look for the little gear icon in the bottom left corner. And then we have 2 ways of adding this new code to the site. The first is with GTag, and the other is with Google Tag Manager. The difficulty with Google is that they have terrible naming conventions. They name things that sound very similar. There's Google Cloud and Google Cloud Platform. They do 2 different things. In this case, we have GTag and Google Tag Manager. So Tag Manager is the way to go. It's a tag management tool that's going to let you collect and send the data to both Universal Analytics and GA4. So instead of adding the G tag on your site, you're going to add Google Tag Manager code, and then you'll have this Google Tag configuration tag inside Tag Manager. It's a better way to do it because you can manage all your tags. So anytime you need to add tracking code to a website, whether that's for your Facebook pixel or you're going to run Google Ads, now GA4, you manage it all within that system. And what it means is that in July, you can just sort of like toggle off your Universal Analytics settings and keep the GA4 settings. So it's a little bit confusing. I'm not going to go into the technical details today, but I'm going to pop the link to the sort of cheat sheet, implementation cheat sheet that I've created for you. Every site is programmed in a slightly different way, and so it becomes difficult in a webinar to walk through those steps, but that'll give you a good starting point. So I'm curious with our second poll question, or actually I'll just ask people to comment in the chat. I'm interested in whether people know if they have GA4 installed yet. Are you using this tool? Anyone keen to admit? I know a handful of publishers that actually have it installed. Oh, we've got a poll question. So yeah, super easy. I see some people saying they don't know. Most people are unsure. There are a couple of ways you can check. You can go to your website and right-click to view source and then look for analytics code or tag manager code. And it's the letter G with a series of letters and numbers after it. Do we have results for our poll? I see in the chat most people don't know. So yeah, a no or a yes. Okay, well, today I'm going to show you around this new tool. We're going to talk about what we track and why we do that in Universal Analytics, and then we'll kind of go through some of the new screens. So this is great for the people who rarely or never use analytics. You can just start fresh with GA4. For those of you who view it often or sometimes, then this at least will give you a way to understand the starting point, some of the reports that you might look at first. So to encourage you to install GA4 or to get that moving with your teams, again, Google is going to stop tracking the data in Universal Analytics in July. And the data only starts tracking in GA4 once you put the new code on your site. They're not going to import the data for you. So the reason you want to do this sooner rather than later is that we have the holiday season coming. And if you want to be able to look at this year's data next year to compare trends or to look at traffic or sales, then the sooner you have GA4 tracking, even at a very basic level, the better. So again, it's not going to get imported into GA4 and they're going to do this hard switch. The big question is always like, well, are they bluffing, right? How could they do that? The thing is, Google has been supporting legacy tracking code since November 2005. They bought a tool called Urchint. They've continued for all that time to support this very old way of collecting and processing data. And it's meant it's had an impact on what they can do within Universal Analytics. So they're really forcing their own hand in going cold turkey, and it's a tool they offer for free. So, you know, it costs them a lot of money to run and process that data for sites where people maybe aren't using that data. And so they are just going to throw that switch. Now, some people are concerned, well, do I have to switch to GA4 if they're going to turn that off? Maybe there are some other alternatives. And it's true, these are the top 3 alternatives that you could use. There's a link on the screen there for a series of tools that have some paid options. So like Adobe Analytics would be something that people might be familiar with as well. I still think GA4 is going to be the best alternative. It is going to continue to be free, and it has the most kind of functionality out of any of these free tools. It also syncs with a lot of other Google tools. So Google Ads, Google Search Console is the way that we can see how people are searching for our site within Google, whether they're clicking on those listings. It integrates with BigQuery, which is a way that we can store and process data outside of analytics. And it integrates with Looker Studio. This used to be called Data Studio. It's now called Looker Studio as of last week. And it's a way to create data visualizations or dashboards. And then, of course, there's a bunch of integrations with Facebook and Shopify and Salesforce, if those are tools that you're using. So the transition's not exactly straightforward, but if you follow the basic setup with the setup assistant, then it will start to create a data stream where you're going to be able to track some of the basic information around users and sessions, so visitors and the visits that they're making to the site. There is a more cumbersome aspect to it, which includes adding e-commerce data tracking or looking at different kinds of events like file downloads or signing up for email newsletters. And in that case, you need some technical skills on your team or some familiarity with Google Tag Manager. So as Craig mentioned, if you are a reader-bound site, then you've got a dev team who can help support you on that. And if you're Shopify, WordPress, Wix, any of these other sites, there's usually plugins or other experts who can help with that install. But our focus today, thankfully, is what is happening in these reports and how are they different. So we're going to look at Universal Analytics, which is the tool most people have installed and can access today. We'll compare the two versions, and I'm going to share 3 or 4 reports in Universal Analytics. So you have things you could look at today. We'll talk about what is similar or how to find something similar in GA4. So quick comparison, if you're familiar at all with Universal Analytics, this is my most favorite report. It's the traffic acquisition report. And basic functionality, we have left-hand navigation that's organized in a funnel, user funnel or life cycle. So we have all the ways that we acquire traffic to our website, what they do on the site, so how they behave, and do they convert? Do they do things that are of value to us? And that could be revenue-based, they're purchasing, or non-revenue-based, they're downloading catalogs, they're signing up for a newsletter, becoming a member on the site, any of those functions. The middle section is always where the guts of the report live. We have a line graph and the data underneath. And in the top right, we have a date selection tool. So we can change the reporting timeframe and we can compare 2 different timeframes. This is about all that's similar in GA4. We have the navigation on the left with some things that are renamed. We have a line chart and a bar chart, and then the table of data. And then we have the date range selector in the top right. So what's tricky here is I mentioned Google is really terrible with its naming conventions, and we have some easy things like new names for the report. So instead of behavior, we have engagement reports. Instead of conversion, we have monetization. That's fine. The challenge is that they have metrics which use the exact same name. Users and sessions would be a prime example, and yet Universal Analytics defines that differently. So fun and games. Users in Universal Analytics means total users. That's any person who's coming to your site, any bot that comes to your site. Those are all users. It's counted as a user. In GA4, we have users, but these are active users. And an active user by default is someone who spends 10 seconds or more on your site, where they engage with the content in some way. So when you get GA4 installed, one of the things to do is to start looking at how your user numbers and session numbers compare. This is part of the troubleshooting that happens. And it's important to know you don't have a good apples to apples comparison here when it comes to users, because in Universal Analytics, we're looking at total users. In GA4, we're looking at active users. So most likely you're going to see fewer GA4 users. Sessions is the other metric that is slightly different. So in Universal Analytics, a session restarted at midnight. If someone was on your site at 11:55 p.m. and they stayed on your site until 12:01, in Universal Analytics, that counts as 2 separate visits rather than 1 visit. So GA4 has gotten rid of that sort of arbitrary midnight refresh. Another metric people are often familiar with is bounce rate. So in Universal Analytics, we talk about bounce rate. Someone who comes to the site, they don't view more than 1 page, they leave. So they sort of like come in and then they bounce out. And GA4 uses a metric called engaged sessions and average engagement rate. So if a person comes and they don't look at more than 1 page, but they spend 10 seconds or more. So they scroll, they click to add an item to a wish list, they interact with the content in some way, they view a video, and then they leave. That's an engaged session. So engagement in my mind is a far better measurement of intent rather than bounce rate. So I'm sort of happy that bounce rate has finally disappeared, but it is something, if you do grant reporting, you might be used to reporting on users and sessions and bounce rate. So I'm calling out these particular discrepancies because it might have an impact on how you do your reporting. And of course, since we have people who sort of rarely use this tool, it's important to maybe chat about why we look at this stuff anyway. At a basic level, your analytics tool can help you understand if your marketing campaigns are having any kind of impact on traffic and sales. So are you getting attention? Are your campaigns creating interest in your authors or titles? Does that interest translate into traffic lifts or sales lifts, or something like resource downloads or email newsletter signups? And typically what's happening is publishers are managing any number of marketing initiatives that give people all sorts of reasons to visit your site. So with analytics, we can understand a little bit more about who those visitors are and what content is of interest to them. So we can think about what we share in social media, what kind of titles we promote in our email marketing newsletter, what we put on our homepage. So instead of focusing only on front list, maybe there's a backlist title that's getting a lot of attention and we want to bring that forward. So we're going to look at a handful of key reports in Universal Analytics so that you have something you're familiar with in the existing tool, and then I'll show you the similar ones in GA4. So the first is kind of an audience report. And the audience reports in Universal Analytics help us understand who comes to the site. So we have time of day that they visited, what countries, or we can drill down to cities, where are they coming from, and what devices are they using? So this data is often good for diagnostics. Is the website experience the same for a desktop user as it is for a mobile user? Maybe there's something we need to tweak for the mobile experience. We can look at the time of day and when people are on the site to understand when we should post news announcements or contest alerts, or when we open for submissions. And if we're running campaigns in different geographic locations, we can look at how that's performing. So we can use these audience reports to understand who's coming. The acquisition reports are about how many people are coming. How do they discover the site? How do we acquire them as visitors? So if you're running online ads, doing organic social media posts, you have email marketing campaigns, then you can look at how each of these channels perform over time, or you can compare one channel to another. And the information here is going to help you decide on what time or financial resources you dedicate to each of these marketing channels. Is it worth your while to advertise on Facebook? Is Instagram performing better? What is happening with TikTok? These reports can help you drill down and look at each of those sources of traffic. If you're working with influencers or different partner organizations, then again, instead of a high-level channel view, you can look at specific sources of traffic to see what volume of traffic is that partner sending our site, and how well does traffic from their site perform on our site. The behavior reports tell us about where people go on the site, what pages they view. So we can look at top viewed pages. We can also look at how people engage with the content on that page. If you're a press with multiple imprints, or you're publishing titles in multiple categories, so you've got fiction, gardening, self-help, the behavior reports can tell you which categories are getting the most attention or which resources are downloaded the most. So if you have a teacher librarian resource section, you can look at which of these guides are being downloaded, what's happening with our catalog. Any type of information that you have, you can use these behavior reports to see how people are engaging and if the pages that they're looking at actually align with your marketing initiatives. So if you're attending Frankfurt and you do a promotion for a particular title, or you go to a teacher librarian conference and you have a dedicated landing page for those attendees, you can use this report to see how many people are viewing that page and whether they're doing any actions that are of value. Is that page somewhere along a path to purchase, or does it lead to a download or a sign up? And then the last section of reports is the conversion report, where we're interested in how each title is performing in terms of views and sales. And of course, there are other ways that people convert. So we can look at whether they took specific actions that are useful to us. Did they sign up for our newsletter so we can continue marketing to them? Do they click follow or share buttons? Do they download content? Do they click to buy somewhere else? So if we're sending people to Amazon or Indigo or Barnes and Noble, can we look at what that click behavior looks like? So these are the sort of ABCs of universal analytics. We look at audience acquisition, behavior, conversion. So who comes to the site, how many people come to the site, and from what sources, where do they go on the site, and do they do anything that generates value? And knowing that information helps us understand, are we reaching the right audience? Or are we providing a good online experience? And we can assess marketing effectiveness by looking at traffic and results. And if we're not seeing results, then we can use that information to figure out, well, how do we optimize or improve either the type of people we're attracting to our site, or how do we optimize the pages that are on the site, or think about the flow of our traffic through the site. So GA4 does similar things, and the content is organized in a similar way. But as I said, it's slightly renamed. So we're going to look at this live demo of the tool. This is GA4. We'll talk about these kind of 3 key reports: the traffic acquisition report, the all pages report, and the e-commerce report. I'm going to skip over audience, but the audience reports, they're now called user, and they're under this section demographics. And we always, in every report, we have an overview, which is fairly useless, and then the detailed report, which actually gives us the information we're looking for. So if you want to look at audience demographic details, it's very similar to the live view that's on the screen. It's always fun to see, exactly who's coming and from where to this demo site. The demographic details will tell you the geographic location information. And then the tech information is what device category. Are they on a desktop, a mobile, a tablet? Or we can look at browser type. It's very useful when you're redesigning a website to be able to understand what tools do we need to be optimizing for. Acquisition, behaviors, renamed engagement, and monetization. So acquisition, we're going to spend the most time in the traffic acquisition report. In GA4, users and sessions are split into 2 separate reports. They used to be combined in Universal Analytics, but in GA4, user acquisition is about how we acquire a user for the very first time to the website. So these are first-time visitors. The traffic acquisition report tells us about all the sources of traffic that are sending people to our site and how that traffic's performing. So I like this report the best. We're going to come back and look at it in more detail. I mentioned behavior is now called engagement. And something interesting with GA4 is that every single interaction with the content is called an event. So events include people start a session on your website. They click a button, they view a page, they scroll. Everything they do is tracked as an event. And then under this configuration section, we can say, I want to mark these particular events as conversions. So whatever is important to your site, you can flag as a conversion. That might be signing up for a newsletter. It could be registering for an event, downloading an excerpt, adding an item to a wish list. Or in the case of this demo site, they're looking at stages through a shopping cart. So add to cart, begin checkout, add the shipping details. You flag whatever event you want as a conversion. Under engagement, we also have pages and screens. This is similar to the all pages reports that we have in Universal Analytics. We'll come back to this one in more depth, but it lets us see what people are viewing, how they're engaging with the content, and whether that's resulting in conversions or revenue. And then we've got a much improved e-commerce report under the monetization section, where we can see what items are sold, what revenue was generated, but we also get this really great funnel where we can see how many people are viewing and then adding to a cart and then actually completing that purchase. So before we dig into those reports, a couple other things we have here. Home is just a quick overview of the last 7 days. Reports, the life cycle reports, are where you're going to spend the most time. Explore is this super fun section that allows you to create reports on the fly. So you start with a blank slate, and then it's a data visualization tool. Advertising is if you are doing any Google ads, it's all integrated and available for you there. And then the configure, as I said, is where we mark what things are a conversion for our particular website. So we're going to start with the acquisition reports. And acquisition, again, it's about how we acquire users or visitors to our site and what we learn about their session or the visits that they make. So this user acquisition report is about how people come to your site for the very first time. The graph in the top is showing the volume of new users over time. And then we have a table breakdown below that's showing us by default the channel that's sending them to us. The bar graph in this case is actually a little bit more handy. We can see that there's a lot of traffic that comes through organic search. So we can look at organic and paid search are people who click on search listings in Google, Baidu, Bing, any of those search tools, and they're either clicking on a main link or a sponsored or paid link. Direct are people who type into your website, they type your URL into their browser. Referral, they're following a link on someone else's website. Social would be Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. Email is email newsletters, and then display and other forms of advertising. So the reports here are all about how people discover your site for the very first time. But because people make multiple visits to a site, I prefer to look at this traffic acquisition report. The report is very similar. It looks similar. That's why I'm calling out there's a difference. That user report is just the very first time they visit. The traffic acquisition report is the most similar to Universal Analytics, the all traffic default channels report. So this is showing us every website visit, not just the first one. And it's the report that we can use to answer questions like, well, which campaigns are working? Who are the influencers or partners encouraging traffic to our website? How effective is our search engine optimization versus our email campaigns or our social media campaigns? So the default table, the default view here is showing us channel groupings. And we can compare top sources of traffic to our site. Does that align with where we're spending our time and money? And we always look at 2 metrics. So volume is great, but we want some context. So what's the engagement time look like, or how many of those sessions are actually engaged? So if I'm running paid search campaigns and I want to know, is it worth the money? Then I'm looking here at, 2,800 of the 5,800 visits are engaged. That seems pretty low. I can use this engagement rate to see that more quickly. And I can say, okay, well, this is pretty low. How does that compare to my other advertising efforts? Well, engagement for paid video and display are all pretty low in comparison to organic search and organic social. So Google, obviously, on this demo site doesn't spend a lot of social media time and effort, but we can use that engagement rate and the volume numbers to kind of understand, well, what should we do here? Is there, if we're paying for video ads and the engagement's low and the number of people who are coming who are low, the action here is, well, what is not successful? Should I move some of that money into my shopping ads, increase the number of people coming from that sort of paid channel where I'm seeing higher engagement? So we use this to kind of assess what's happening with our campaigns overall. And we have this date selector up in the top. So what I'm often doing is looking month over month. How does one month compare to the next? So we have a compare function. I'm often looking year over year. So I want to see, how does this fall quarter compare to last fall? Or I'm doing grant reporting. So what are we looking at year over year? If we invested in email marketing, did we see a lift in traffic and engagement in that channel? How does it compare to other channels? Or if I have run a campaign for 1 week, I want to, use this time function to compare, how does this week of traffic look in comparison to last week? Did I see that lift in traffic? Did I see that lift in sales? So we have this date selection tool, which allows us to compare different timeframes. And then we can slice and dice this data in lots of different ways. So we have a comparison function. Maybe we're doing a campaign that we're in Frankfurt and we want to see, do we have any lift in our traffic that's coming from Germany, right? So a bunch of people are coming, maybe we want to look at that traffic. Or maybe we're doing specific campaigns in Canada or the US or the UK, and we want to see, how does that traffic compare to all users on the site? Or maybe we want to compare Canada to the US. So these comparison functions allow us to look at that breakdown of traffic in the graphs and in the table data. We can easily get rid of those comparisons and go back to our all users, remembering that all users are all active users, not all users. And then we have other ways to look at subsets of this data. So I mentioned, if you're running a particular campaign or you have a particular partner organization, instead of looking at this as a default channel, we can say, show me the source medium. So maybe Perks at Work is the influencer that I'm working with, and I want to see, what kind of traffic is that influencer website sending me? What kind of engagement rate do they have on the site? And maybe the event I'm interested in is, do they view an item? Do they go to a book detail page, or do they view a promotion? Conversion, maybe I only want to look at purchases and revenue. So how many transactions did that lead to? What was the total revenue? So we have ways we can manipulate these reports in order to see a little more information about specific channels. Or we can drill down and say, you know what, I don't want to look at, when I go back and I want to look at all my email campaigns. So I can search for email and say, show me the campaign name. So I want to look at the name for each of these email campaigns and compare, okay, well, how did my September campaigns do compared to October? So we have all these different ways that we can use the traffic report, and volume of traffic is always important, but having some context, especially around engagement, events, or conversions, is the way to use this particular report. It's versatile. I really like it. And it's answering some of those quick questions that people have. Was this marketing effort worth it? Did we see that increase in traffic or sales? The behavior report, the pages and screens report, this is where we're looking at specific campaigns. So if we're promoting a certain title or a page on the site, we use this report to look at volume and engagement on that particular page. So doing a comparison is often helpful. We're looking at average engagement time on the whole site. And then we look for certain pages where we have lower than expected engagement. Blog pages are always going to have a different amount of engagement versus a book detail page. So maybe we want to look at a particular category or type of page and compare engagement rate across those pages. So this report's often used to improve what's happening on a site. We look for, where do we have really high engagement? Why do we have that? We look for, where do we have really low engagement? Is there a description that needs to be fixed, or more images that need to be added? And when we have particular interest in book pages, the monetization reports in GA4 are really helpful, because we've got the default view is by page views. So we can see which of those book detail pages are getting the most views, and does interest in a title actually translate to add to cart or to e-commerce purchases. We could sort this by revenue, so we can look at, top performing titles. We can use the little plus function to say, show me the imprint or show me the category. If you have a particular title that's nominated for a bunch of awards, you can search for just that particular title and see what the interest is in terms of page views and whether that's translating to sales. And if it's not translating to sales, maybe you've got a lot of add to carts, but nobody following through, then you can look at, well, what's happening in terms of this funnel? Is there a section of the site that we need to update or improve? If you have a lot of interest and no add to carts, then maybe you go back to that pages and screens report and search just for that single page and see, are there other conversions happening here? Click to buy on Amazon or add to a wish list. So I'm just checking the time here, and I want to ask for our next poll question, which is, if you're kind of unfamiliar with reports or you're using these reports, which of these three kind of are most useful to you? Is it a traffic acquisition report where you can see where people are coming from, where the traffic to the site is coming from and how it's performing? Or are you more interested in, which pages are getting a lot of activity? Or is it e-commerce all the way? Show me what's selling and what kind of traffic they have. So we always have this kind of funnel of activity. Traffic is going to show us the most information. Behavior is the engagement that's happening. And then e-commerce is very specific to the 1 to 3% of people who perform that activity. So I'm curious, if you were going to use this tool more often, which of those functions is most useful?
I have somebody, Monique, in the chat directly to us saying, money, always show me the money and where it is coming from, LOL.
Yeah, the monetization report in GA4 is such a huge improvement over that report in Universal Analytics that it's my new favorite report. I always like to know exactly where the money is coming from because it justifies the other marketing spend that you're doing online. But it's in Universal Analytics, this traffic sources report was always my go-to because it was sort of showing you what the GA4 monetization report is showing now. So yeah, a lot of interest in the traffic sources. It is super versatile. It's my go-to report in Universal Analytics. So just having a quick look here, in Universal Analytics acquisition, all traffic channels, that's the sort of key report in Universal Analytics because you get this breakdown of acquisition, the sort of engagement metrics and conversion. So you can change, this to any of your goals, or you can look specifically at e-commerce. In GA4, once you get that installed, this monetization report, I think, is so important because a lot of our marketing activity is directing people to a particular page on the site. So we can sort this by what's selling and get into that e-commerce side of things, but we can use this to say, well, what's actually being viewed? If there's a particular title where we're running a promotion, then in GA4, we have, this is called a secondary dimension where we add that other screen to it. So we can say, well, show me the source of traffic to each of those pages. And it's going to give us that kind of deeper look into the content. We also have this crazy explore function, which is the thing that I said is kind of on the fly where you build a report. So when you have really great business questions that come internally, then you sort of turn your analytics person over to this section where maybe you want to explore the path someone is taking to or from a particular page. So maybe our campaigns are sending a whole bunch of people to a particular book detail page and we're not seeing those add to carts or purchases. We can use the path exploration to see, well, are they going on to recommended titles or looking at books by the author? Are they doing a search? Are they going to a blog post? Are they exiting the site entirely? So the path exploration will do that. The funnel is super if you're trying to diagnose what's happening through a particular series of stages, so like a shopping cart flow. And then Freeform is this kind of table of data. You can make any kind of table of data that you want. When you click on those kind of templates, they're going to populate it for you so you can get an idea of what goes where. I kind of freaked out the first time that I saw this report because I was like, what are we doing here? But if I start a blank one, what's happening is we're defining on the left all the variables that we might want to use in our report. So dimensions are the things that show up in the rows, and metrics are the things that show up in the columns. So if I wanted to create the landing page report, GA4 doesn't have a landing page report. We have the all pages report, every bit of traffic that comes, but we don't have a very specific way to look at what's the very first page that people come to. So the explore function allows us to do that. I'm just going to pop this back to the real-time screen and ask people in the chat, are there questions or things that you're trying to do in analytics or would like to know about your data? And we can kind of end our session with some Q&A.
I've received a couple directly, Monique, that we can start with.
Yeah, super.
Somebody asking, is it a big ask? Is it a big task to put GA4 on my website?
No-ish. So if you can edit your website theme, what you're doing is adding a piece of code to your site so that it shows up on every single page. And ideally, you're going to use Google Tag Manager. There are a ton of really great tutorials. I'll see if I've got a list up here on the screen. So Analytics Mania, the guy who runs this site, has a YouTube channel where there's a lot of free content that is really great for showing you exactly how to implement this code. Tag Manager is the way to go. Don't get confused with instructions about GTag. So Google Tag Manager, all you're going to do is create an account and you sort of follow along clicking some buttons. You want to add a Google Analytics conversion code. You push your little tracking ID into that, and then on you go. I think over the next couple of months, people on Shopify sites or WordPress, some of those sites will hopefully update where the analytics code goes. But usually they just want you to run one piece of code. So Universal Analytics or GA4. That's why I'm recommending Tag Manager. And it is fairly simple to create a Tag Manager account and to follow the steps in those tutorials on how to add the tag. It's the e-commerce part that I'd say is where you're going to require a developer or to have some technical skills on your own to understand how your site is coded and what you might want to track as a conversion. But things like clicking, downloading, scrolling, a lot of those things are fairly easy to implement.
That's great. And it's interesting you just mentioned Shopify integration, because we do have a question about Shopify as well. Adam asking, Shopify's backend/dashboard has a lot of analytics reporting baked in. How is this different than using GA, whether it's Universal Analytics or GA4?
I actually find the Shopify analytics to be quite robust. So the Shopify analytics are really great. They're going to tell you the focus in Shopify is more about e-commerce. And so the reports that are more handy in Google Analytics or GA4 are going to be related to the ways that you can drill down in that data and look more specifically at what sources of traffic are sending people to an individual page. How do those campaigns at a page level perform? Shopify does have a couple of like good kind of filters and ways to break down some of the traffic, especially because it gathers all the data about customers. So the Shopify analytics are really good for looking at who are your VIP customers, who are the people who come back and purchase more than once. So I use the Shopify analytics in conjunction with Google Analytics. So I'm looking higher level at what's happening in Shopify. And then anytime I'm doing diagnostics about why a funnel is not working or what's happening on individual pages, that's when I'm turning to analytics.
Great. We do have, let's see if we can fly through these in the next 5 minutes because we have a few good questions here. The folks at Broadview asking, what does reporting on individually tagged campaigns created through the Google URL builder look like in GA4?
Yeah, so you can drill down to any of those reports in the exact same way. So under traffic acquisition, if you are using the URL builder and you have a campaign name, or you want to look at source or source medium, this report lets you see exactly your campaign traffic. And if you are very good at your naming conventions, you could sort of search for a particular series of ones, or you can say, show me only my Instagram campaigns or only my email marketing campaigns. So however you're building out that URL, it's this little pop down that will help you, hone in on just the campaign traffic or however you're building that parameter.
Great. And in the chat, we have tips for building Google Ads campaigns with GA4. Any new integrations or short codes to look out for?
So when you go through the admin kind of setup or the configuration setup, what you're doing is making sure in GA4 that it understands what a conversion is in Google Ads. So because these are two Google tags, it does sort of work more seamlessly. But again, it depends on how complicated your Google Ad setup is. So I recommend installing the GA4 tag, running it through Tag Manager. You can have your Google Ad conversion tags in Tag Manager as well. And then I've been going back to Google Ads and resetting the conversions within Google Ads. But I'm sure with this website, Optimize Smart, they have a lot of great tutorials on how to do that setup. And my experience with GA4 is that every single week there's something that's new or slightly different in how they're creating this tool. This is why I think some people think, oh, they must be bluffing because there's still a lot of change happening. But I'd say, Optimize Smart, that team is really on top of the most recent way to create those integrations. But it has been for me going into the conversion section within Google Ads.
Couple more. Alina asking, is it possible to set up custom reports to get sent to you via email at certain intervals?
Within Universal Analytics, this was a fantastic feature where we could create custom dashboards or custom reports and email them out. GA4 just is not exactly the same. This is the demo account, so we're not seeing it, but there is a way in GA4 to create a library. So you can create a series of dashboards or reports that are specific to maybe just your VP team, and one that's more specific to your day-to-day marketing team who's running campaigns. So you can customize and create reports and then store them within a library. But I haven't seen that same function yet, where you get an email report that's sent to you. And again, I say yet because every week there are new things that are being added, and those custom reports in the email of the report, that was a super handy feature. So I feel like it's got to be on the way.
Yeah, and as you were saying the other day, Monique, new stuff is happening constantly. Do you want to speak to that just very quickly?
Yeah, so like Data Studio has been a tool that people have used for much more customized reports. So instead of having the reports within Universal Analytics and then emailed, there's this other tool that used to be called Data Studio. And you can design very beautiful reports that are great to share with people who are maybe on a board. They don't have login access to Google Analytics. So that tool has been around for a while. And then just last week, they renamed it Looker Studio and have integrated it with Looker, which is another tool that Google purchased maybe a year ago. It's fairly recent in my mind. So there's always things that are changing. Even that sort of crazy explore section, we used to not have bounce rate as a metric at all in GA4, and I saw it snuck back in there the other day. So there's always changes, which means, you know, when you're following a tutorial or you're going through a session, if there's something on the screen that is not exactly what you see, it's quite possible that that's just a change. It's been very difficult as a sort of analytics expert to remain the expert because it does change.
That's great. We're just at 2 o'clock now. We do have Malika from Caitlin Press asking about excluding publisher site activity, which I know you can do by IP address. And I think she's a reader bound client, so maybe Craig can reach out directly and help with that stuff. But yeah, I think we're out of questions and out of time, but I certainly learned a lot. Thank you, Monique.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And you'll have my contact details there as well. I often feel like if you're spinning your wheels, please just ask. And undoubtedly, I have tried to do the same thing. And I do really enjoy finding out how people are using the tool or where they're getting stuck. So feel free to reach out as you explore analytics.
Great. And
Awesome.
We will be sending out the recording as well. Maybe Craig, you want to speak just briefly about that?
Yeah, we'll tidy up the recording and send it out to everybody that was here and that registered that couldn't attend, that's in Frankfurt pitching rights like mad as we speak right now. And but this was fantastic. I just was sitting here kind of, you know, following along the quickly moving cursor as best I could. This could obviously be a much longer session, but I think a great way for us to kind of step back and think a little bit about how we're using analytics and what types of things it can really offer to publisher teams now as you're running these more sophisticated sites. So big thanks to Monique, big thanks to Trish for getting us started with our first webinar session today. And thanks to everybody for joining us. We're a little bit over time. I know people have other meetings and everything else to go through, so we'll close it out there for today and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.